Our final presentation in this session before break, before Q&A. And just a reminder on Q&A, you can head on up here, Jesse, it's fine. Just a reminder on Q&A, there are cards on your tables. You can write down a question you have, pass it on to either Cassie or Krista or myself. Just pass them off to someone, pass it up to Pete, that's fine. And even if you have a quick question, you think, I see a lot of people running up talking to presenters afterwards because they have questions. Don't be afraid to ask it for the group, because part of the learning experience here is for us to all hear each other's questions. So our last presentation here is a case study on chemical history for the Reid Ranch, and Jesse's going to give us an introduction to that project as well as kind of what they've been finding there. So Jesse Lisburg.
All right. Again, the title of this topic, or this talk, was the Reid Ranch: Inheriting Somebody Else's Chemical and Weed Management or Land Management History, and then also just remaining flexible in plans for grass restoration. The landowner, Wilbur Reid, he couldn't be here today. Pete tasked us with giving a little snapshot of just what Wilbur went through this last summer, and just what it took to in the planning process, both from knowing what prior crops, knowing the prior chemical history, looking at the way the land has been managed in the past, looking at his goals and how his goals are to basically restore grass in a quick way. So that's what I'll attempt to do here. Hopefully I can do it justice. I think Wilbur would have appreciated being here. He just had other business. And by the way, that is not the chemical stockpile at this place. But that on the right, that is what the landscape looks like. The property is located about 45 minutes west of the Fort Pierre area. It is 26,000 acres. And the idea is to put that back to grass, but what a monumental task, right? And where do you begin? And that's a closer look at what's been farmed out there. And it's not that it's bad cropland at all. It actually isn't terrible crop ground. It's just the landscape that's trying to be cropped. Another picture just of the type of ground we're talking about. And from a conservation perspective, if you look at how it fits in with the landscape, this is pretty cool to me, because, when restored, this will fit nicely back into a predominantly grass landscape. All right, so what we know about that place is that the predominant crops are wheat and sorghum and corn and sunflowers and millet. Some of the same crops that you just heard Brian talk about, right? And some of the concerns that can come up with that. Well, what did Wilbur do? He knew the previous crop history. So this was, and really we'll boil it down to kind of the more recent crop history. We can go back a number of years, but what he did was focus on the last couple of years primarily. And so you've got, sunflowers over there on the west end. You've got spring wheat down the center, millet, corn. And in 2024, the crop rotation, looked like this again, the same crops, just spread around in different places. And that crop history, of course, it plays a role in where weed populations are or not, or what people have sprayed here or there. I mean, the biggest problem they have out there is this plant right here, this kochia. This is a real bastard. It's spread throughout that property. Of course, in some areas, quite a bit worse than in other areas. Particularly if you look back at this crop history here, particularly where those sunflower fields were in the west end over there in 2023, and then you look at what they are this year, those are all kochia acres over there now. Pretty bad kochia problems. And then on the far east end, we see some of the same thing. So in 2023, where there was sort of millet and that corn area there, this year it was mostly corn all the way over there to the east. Pretty tough kochia problems in those places. So what we had, or what Wilbur had, was he has a pretty good history of the chemical use on this place, and those were actually written out records from the operator or the operator's manager, wherever those came from. That came right from the operator. Those were this year's chemical records. And here's some of those names in there, and you might recognize some of those that Brian had talked about. If I didn't have to have stronger glasses, I could probably read some of them, but dicamba, for instance, or Mad Dog. The thing about this place, the thing about this ground is, I don't think anything's very complicated in what they used in their chemical stuff. I mean, this topic absolutely sucks as far as from, a wildlife biologist standpoint. This is such a complicated topic. Chemicals, the thousands of chemicals that are out there, the new ones that are coming on every day. Mad Dog, for instance, it's just another form of it's just another glyphosate. You got Roundup Power, right? Roundup Power. You bet. Let's go more power. And so you've got just this myriad of chemicals that have been used on that place. But I don't think anything, nothing extreme that I could pull out that's 24 months or some of these longer term residuals. If you look down there on the bottom there, you'll notice that atrazine is used on the place, pretty common chemical. But on this particular year, only in fields 217, 220, and 221. Well, if I was to point out where that's at, I'll show you here in a minute. That's on a part of the place that ended up not getting planted to grass. Again, a variety of chemicals, more Mad Dog, some other form of dicamba there. I think that one's called Rifle, yeah. And then this here in the sunflower country, RT3, maximum glyphosate. We might as well call that one maximum glyphosate. But just a variety of chemicals used on that place. And again, I'll just say that this topic is like major high on the sucker meter. So what else did he have? So in addition to knowing crop history, also knew the chemicals that had been used in those crops, to solidify kind of in his mind, if that data from chemical use was true or not. Some soil tests got done, and this was mainly to just look at where atrazine might be, just because that seemed to be the most concerning chemical for him. And so those soil tests, they showed no atrazine actually, and that was strategic. Those soil tests were taken in areas where corn was planted, where it was reported that they had not sprayed atrazine, just to confirm that, which is that's a good thing, right? We have a result that he actually wanted. If you also look up there, there's another chemical up there. I think it's like metachlor or something like that. It showed up in very small amount. And the ironic thing about that was kind of that was a surprise. So out of what they knew, based on this soil test, it was something that they weren't expecting to actually show there. Very, very small amount there. I'm just saying that what you think you know, you may not know. And And so then you follow that up with, you know your crop history, you know what chemicals have been used there, you did some soil tests. It doesn't do away with the fact that you should be doing some field surveying, right? Where are my weed problems? Where do I have areas of opportunity, right? That's how I titled that, is where are my areas of opportunity, if I have any? And so field scouting was done pretty much throughout the season last year. And what you found was many areas of that milo were terribly weedy, terribly choked out with kochia. And all of that's part of limiting your risk, right? All of those things that we just talked about, limiting your risk. This is just that soil test where I pointed out that atrazine was only sprayed in those few fields there. And the soil test showed it, because Wilbur only tested the areas that were supposedly not sprayed with that. And he found that positive result. And then, showing the one chemical that showed up that wasn't even expected. So over on the east end over there, with that red, kind of squiggly line over there, those were the areas that had some that were known to be sprayed with atrazine, and so those areas came off of the possibility of being seeded. They came off right away. They came off of the area of, it was no longer an area of potential. And then, looking at weed pressure, field scouting, knowing the previous crop histories, that led to maybe where his limited risk sort of best opportunities ended up. And so this is just a map of where those limited risk best opportunities became reality, I would say. Something we didn't talk about, but I will, is the opportunity to, like in this case, this little case history here. It was talked about, during the growing season about, maybe this should be just a warm season only planting, and okay, maybe this should be where we only plant, this, or maybe this should be, any number of ways that you can think about going about restoring grass. While having that discussion, you also have to look at, that scale. The scale is not 100 acres. The scale is not quarter sections. We're talking sections in scale, and we're also talking the need for this to get restored to grass in a relatively short time frame, if possible. And some of these other options, what they do, you may benefit yourself on one hand, but you cost yourself some opportunities on the other side of the coin. And so looking at this, we could have, Wilbur could have decided to go with a planting that we used, that was plateau was used, and you just plant your warm season grasses, you establish that, you follow that with your broadleaf plants. Or you could go with planting, all of your grasses first, then you could follow that with managing that with milestone. Any number of ways of looking at how you move forward after you start moving forward. He chose just to throw everything he had at it, as far as in the seed mix, throw everything in the seed mix at that, and with limited sort of risk, the idea of moving forward will be manage moving forward. So rather than costing time, he chose to move forward faster and deal with the forthcoming issues. That may mean mega mowing. That may mean a lot of things, but that's just what the landowner chose. And so, I wanted to mention that there are other options. You know, the landowner could do many things differently. In this case, you know, limiting the risk of knowing what your past chemical was, knowing the previous crop history, scouting the land and knowing what you have, where you have problems and where you think you have opportunity, and then looking at the choice of maybe using one of these avenues, the chemical avenue. At the end of the day, it's still a landowner's choice of which direction, you know, they want to go. And I'm not sure. I think I'm done. I think I want to get off of this podium because this topic just really sucks in my mind. It's a terrible topic. It's something that I don't feel like there's a ton of clear resources out there for, you know, professional folks like us. You know, on if this, then that, and down the trail of how to go forward. So, sure. All right. Thank you.